So, welcome to episode 2 of the Diary of the Wife of the Dying Man. And this episode 2 is called High Risk of Falls. So Mick gets a single room for the treatment because the treatment that he goes through impacts on his immune system. So he needs to stay isolated and away from as many germs as possible. But I can visit as often as I want. I don't need to gown up. I don't need to mask up just through the ward. I have to mask up through the ward, but not actually in his room, which is really convenient because I'm there for a long time and sitting in a mask is just horrible stuff. So anyway, I've been to see him every afternoon. He's been in there a week now. I've been to see him every afternoon. I get there generally about 2-ish, between 2 and 2:30. I stay till between sort of 6:30 and 7. And with the journey there and back, it's about 6 hours out of my day. Now, don't get me wrong, I absolutely don't begrudge this. Well, not much. But it does take its toll on other things, such as, running my business, my social life. And it is absolutely exhausting, fitting it all in and sitting in hospitals. I don't know what it is about hospitals, but they're just exhausting. And the nurses are really grateful for me being there because it takes the pressure off them and their resources. So he's down as a vulnerable patient with high risk of falls. And so they try and have somebody with him at all times. Obviously, that takes up their resource. And most of the time he is okay. It's just the odd occasion that he needs a bit of support. So this is different to last year because when he went in September 2023, he had a few incidents, and they've learnt from last time that he does in fact need some extra support because he was an absolute nightmare last time, and in fact the time before, 5 years ago, when he first had it. So we just explain that Mick was originally diagnosed with multiple myeloma, which is the blood cancer, in 2018. And how that came about is a story in itself, but I'll talk about that in another episode. But in 2018, which I have to say was the worst year of my life, and that's another story as well. But lots of things going on that year, from being ripped off by builders to being bullied at work, through to Mick being diagnosed with blood cancer. But we all have these things to deal with, and we have to get on with it. So he had chemo all through 2018, which was really tough because he had to go into the hospital twice a week, and it played havoc with my career. But obviously it had to be done. So he went through the chemo through the year. He ended with a stem cell transplant in December, and they actually asked us if we minded being in over Christmas, and we were like, no, we didn't have any other plans anyway. As it happens, he came out on Christmas Eve. But so he had the stem cell transplant in December, and he was, because it was just a tough year really, because going through that all year, he couldn't do any of it alone because of his MS. He wasn't capable of driving himself there, or being alone in the wheelchair, gets very confused about things. So I was literally there every step of the way, because his health is most important. And even though it played havoc with my career and jobs and life, it just has to be done sometimes. You just have to get through it. And as I said before, when I talk about it really does feel like we went through this treatment, because apart from the bit where he actually feels shit, obviously, it is a thing that we did together every step of the way. So anyway, he had the stem cell transplant in December 18. It involves 30 minutes of high toxic chemo, followed a day later by replacing his own stem cells back in. So they get popped back into his bloodstream, and then they start to build up good stuff. So they've got rid of the cancer and the bad stuff, and the stem cells then work on rebuilding good blood. And it is fascinating, I have to say, the whole process, which I will go through with you at some stage, but the whole process is literally fascinating, and it is life-saving treatment. But the first time we had it done, it seems it didn't agree with Mick. And at 5:30 in the morning of the day that they gave him the chemo, I got a call from the hospital. Well, it's never going to be good news, is it, if you're getting a call from the hospital at 5:30 in the morning? So he had reacted to the chemo, he'd had a seizure, and he was now in an induced coma in intensive care. And when I spoke to him about it, he's not a he used to be tall, he used to be like 6'1", but with all the the blood cancer, and that's really impacted on his bone. So he has shrunk quite a bit now. He's only about 5'9", 5'10", and he's not a fat person. He's got a bit of a belly, but he's quite slight. And apparently they had a real fight with him to get him onto the bed to actually take him to intensive care, because he was just fighting off people. So they had to get a couple of porters and that to help. But he had this seizure, and they took him into intensive care. They rang me. I went and turned up, and he was okay. It was just precautionary. And after checking him out, they brought him out of the coma, and the treatment went ahead. And it gave him 4 years in remission before the cancer returned in 2023. So in 2023, as I mentioned, we had another year of chemo, but this time it was just tablets at home, which was great, but then followed by another stem cell transplant in September. Didn't have a seizure this time because they'd recognised that, given him some anti-seizure drugs. But while he was in for those 2.5 weeks, he was a nightmare. So he pulled out his PICC line. The PICC line's like where they put the treatment in. So it's like a cannula that you have in your hand, but they leave it in there. So he pulled out the PICC line. He had another Hickman line, which is a bit of a thicker one that they had put the stem cells back in. So he broke that, blood everywhere. He had a cannula that got blocked. He had 2 falls, one of which was really nasty. So when the consultant suggested in January 2024 that we were going to go through it again, I did ask him to check with his team that his nursing colleagues were actually happy to take him back in, because he'd been such a nightmare. I mean, all of this is because the MS makes him confused. He forgets that he can't walk. He forgets he's attached to the PICC line and, to the stand with the fluids and things hanging on it. So then he gets up and tries to go to the toilet, and then he just pulls things over. He falls over because he forgets where he is. So I was a bit nervous about him going back in, but as I say, this time they had him down as a vulnerable person. They had him down as high risk of falls, and so there was somebody with him most of the time. We had no incidents at all. As it happened, the nurses loved him. They did usually have somebody with him, and he was very popular with them. Few of them actually told me that he was lovely to treat because he was quite easy to treat, and that he was funny. I mean, he was grumpy with me, of course, but as long as he was all right with them, then that's fine. So over the 2.5 weeks, for me, this is what it looked like. I'd started going to a strength training class. So this is when I talk about 2.5 weeks, I'm in that second sort of like phase now. And I was going to a strength training class. So I was up at 5:20 in the morning, going to a 6 o'clock session, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, slightly later on a Saturday. I then go for a walk every morning in the woods. I've been doing this since I had to stop swimming in lockdown, and I love it. I usually walk for about 5 miles, 5 or 6 days a week, and it just really keeps me healthy and sane, and just getting out in nature makes all the difference to everything. I can forget everything that's going on when I'm out in those woods. And I always come back, I shower, I have breakfast, I do a bit of work. I own my own coaching business, so I help women to create successful careers and have happy lives. So I had arranged my schedule so that I had client sessions either in the morning or later in the evening when I'd got home. So I'd deal with that in the morning. After lunch, I head to the hospital. I get there for about 2-ish. I stay until between 6 and 7, depending on whether I've got a client, depending on how grumpy Mick is and whether he's pissed me off and I want to leave early, or whether I want to stay a bit longer with him. And as I said, no instance this time at all, not one fall, no PICC line issues, just lots of shitty pants, which is another story. So we'll talk to you about week 2 in the next episode.